They called you crazy now. They call you sir. But first, before the crown, before the calm, before the silence that made them tremble, there was you. Not the one they see now, the one they erased, the one who bled in silence, the one who stayed when everyone else left and was still abandoned. This is not a celebration. This is a resurrection. To the ones forgotten not by accident, but by design, I see you. To the soul who was too much for their shallow waters, who loved too deeply, spoke too honestly, stood too loyally only to be treated like noise when they grew tired of music. To the hands that built kingdoms for people who spat at the bricks. To the voice that whispered truth in rooms filled with polite lies and was punished for its clarity. To the heart that kept beating through betrayal so quiet the world never heard the murder. You were not weak. You were unprotected. And that is not the same thing. The world does not mourn those it quietly disposes of. It moves on, as if your love was a phase, your presence a placeholder. They forget you while you still remember the temperature of their betrayal. This monologue is not a speech. It is a mirror, held up to the ones they tried to erase and failed. I am not here to inspire you. I am here to remind you of the fire they tried to drown, because you didn't fade. You were buried. But you were not soil. You were the seed. They dressed your silence in madness. They called your truth drama. Your wounds became entertainment in mouths that never fed your soul. They turned your grief into gossip, and then they laughed like they weren't eating pieces of you with every joke. But ghosts don't stay dead forever. This is for the ones who screamed into pillows instead of punching walls, the ones who left instead of begged, the ones who forgave too many times until forgiveness became a graveyard. You were called too emotional, too intense, too much, but they were just too shallow to swim in your depth. And when they couldn't understand your storm, they labeled you dangerous. Not because you were, but because you could survive what they never could. Now you walk quieter. Now your smile doesn't reach your eyes. Now your love has gates. And not everyone gets a key. They wonder what changed. But the truth is, nothing changed. You just stopped giving your soul to people who only brought forks. You were never weak. You were sacred, and they treated you like common ground. Like a stop along the way, like an echo that didn't deserve to become a voice. But the thing about echoes is they return, even after the ones who made the noise are gone. So rise now, not with fury, but with clarity. This isn't revenge. This is remembrance of who you were before the world taught you shame, of what you carried before they taught you to shrink. Of how powerful you are when your silence is finally your own. To the ghost who still breathes, who still walks with stitched-up dignity, who carries unspoken agony like armor. This is your invocation. They called you crazy. Now let them watch what madness becomes, when it no longer needs permission to exist. This is only the beginning, and they don't even know it yet. But you do. And that's why you're still here. They didn't just leave. They staged your disappearance with a smile. A well-rehearsed vanishing act, not of their presence, but of your worth. One moment, you were everything. The next, you were nothing but a noise they claimed they needed silence from. But the silence wasn't about peace. It was about power, control. You gave them light, and they cursed you for not shining on command. You gave them shelter, and they accused you of building walls. You gave them love, and they named it obsession because they were never ready for the weight of something real. They smiled while setting fire to everything you gave, And when it burned, they pointed at the ashes and asked why you made such a mess. That's the betrayal no one talks about. Not the moment they left, but the slow, surgical withdrawal of dignity. The way they rewrote the story while you were still bleeding inside its pages. They told their version first, and louder, so by the time you found your voice, it sounded like denial. They didn't just walk away. They made sure the room blamed you for the broken glass after they slammed the door. You weren't just abandoned. You were edited out, like a scene that made the hero look bad. They painted you unstable because you refused to stay silent in the face of their manipulations. They called you toxic when you stopped apologizing for your instincts. They labeled you jealous when you noticed the lies before they were ready to confess. They made you feel guilty for reacting to the wounds they kept reopening. And when you finally broke, they said, "See, I told you they were crazy." They weaponized your care, turned your empathy into ammunition against you. You weren't allowed to be hurt, only useful, only quiet, only available on their terms. The betrayal wasn't a moment. It was a slow erosion, a gentle unhooking of the heart. While they held your hand and swore nothing was changing, they drained you, then blamed you for being empty. And worst of all, you almost believed them. You stood in front of their mirror for so long that their version of you started to make sense. A funhouse reflection warped just enough to convince you that maybe you were the problem. But no, the problem was that you were real, and they were wearing masks so long, they forgot what truth looked like. So when you showed up whole, flawed, luminous, they panicked. Because real can't be controlled. Real can't be predicted. Real can't be replaced. So they tried to reduce you to bite-sized pieces, to something manageable. They couldn't destroy your essence, so they assassinated your image. In their new world, you were rewritten as unstable, unworthy, unbearable. But deep down, they know what they did. They know the price they paid. They know they burned the only bridge that ever carried them through their storms. They smiled while they did it, but their smile was made of fear, because even as they left, they knew you were the best thing they'd never understand, and they destroyed it before it had a chance to show the world what grace under fire really looked like. This wasn't an exit, it was an execution. And you were the body they walked over to get to lesser versions of what you gave for free. Now they drink from cups you once filled and still feel thirsty. Now they sleep in beds that don't remember them, while yours still knows what betrayal feels like. And still you rise, not out of forgiveness, not yet, but out of the knowledge that the real betrayal was ever doubting your own value because someone else couldn't see it. Let that sink in. Let it burn. Because the fire they started is the same one you'll use to light your return. They thought leaving you meant elevation, as if distance could crown them wiser, as if discarding you made them higher, cleaner, clearer. They mistook absence for ascension, when in truth it was only escape. Not from you, but from the mirror you held to their face. They convinced themselves they had grown, that letting you go was maturity, evolution, a shedding of dead weight. But it wasn't growth, it was retreat, and they dressed it in language sharp enough to wound, yet vague enough to protect their image. You were too intense. I needed peace. It just wasn't working. No mention of their betrayal. No ownership of the cold games they played, while pretending they were on a path of light. Because they never evolved. They just shrank into more socially acceptable costumes. Softer masks. Smiles with cleaner edges, but the same rotting core underneath. They thought walking away made them gods. As if detachment was divinity. As if silence was superiority. but the throne they climbed onto was built from your bones, your effort, your loyalty, your relentless grace in the face of their erosion. They mistook your stillness for weakness, your patience for passivity, your loyalty for lack. They thought you were a cracked mirror, too raw, too real, too much reflection for their shallow eyes to bear. So they replaced you with polish, with shine, with something that glittered better in public light. But what glitters is often glass, and glass shatters. You were stone, heavy with truth, unmoved by illusions, unbreakable even when buried. They thought they had the upper hand, that by leaving you, they would prove they were above you. But elevation is not distance, and silence is not strength. They confused convenience with clarity. They assumed that just because you didn't fight back, you had nothing left to fight with. But you weren't quiet because you were defeated. You were quiet because you had already won. The battlefield was inside you, and you had already walked through it, on broken feet, with a mouth full of ashes, and a spine made of grief. They thought they could rise by stepping over your stillness, but you were not a floor. You were a foundation, and without you beneath them, they began to sink, one smile at a time, one shallow replacement at a time, one echo of you in someone else's body, but never your soul. They thought cutting you off was a statement, a line in the sand, a declaration of self-worth. But the only thing they declared was how deeply they feared being seen. And you saw them too much, too closely, too clearly. They wanted the benefits of your depth without the burden of accountability. So they ran, not upward, not forward, just away. And now they call it growth. But growth doesn't leave bodies behind. It doesn't burn bridges and then blame the wind. It doesn't replace gold with glitter and call it healing. No, what they did wasn't power. It was pretense, wrapped in self-help language and swallowed by people who didn't know your name, but knew your silhouette through rumor. They crowned themselves in your silence, but they will drown in it too, because what they left behind was never broken, only buried. And now the stone breathes. Let them believe they won. Let them keep pretending they leveled up. Because soon, very soon, they'll realize the ladder they climbed was resting on the very soul they threw away. Time doesn't heal. Time unmasks. It doesn't wrap wounds. It peels them, layer by layer, until what they buried beneath convenience, performance, and curated charm begins to rot in the open. And now, their mask is melting. You never had to lift a finger. You didn't plot. You didn't smear. You simply endured. And that was enough, because time is a surgeon. It cuts through pretense with precision, and the scalpel always finds the lie. They thought they walked away clean, but dirt doesn't wash off that easily. It clings to their voice, to their patterns, to the hollow look in their eyes when no one is watching. And now, people are watching. The charm they used like currency, diminishing. The story they told about you, unraveling. The replacements they paraded in your absence, fading like perfume left in the rain. What they touched turns to rust. What they chased turns to dust. And what they tried to build without you collapses under the weight of your absence. The ones they chose instead of you, smiles with no soul, bodies with no gravity, ghosts dressed in validation, shadows trying to cast light. And it worked for a while. They smiled louder, posted brighter, laughed emptier. But cracks don't stay hidden. Not forever. The same games they played with you, they're playing again. The same masks, the same tactics, the same decay. And now the world is beginning to notice. They thought your silence was weakness, but it was prophecy. And every day, the truth you buried in restraint is rising in echoes. They can't mute anymore. They're being seen now, not as victims, but architects, not as wounded, but as sculptors of their own downfall. People are starting to ask questions about the patterns, the gaps, the inconsistencies, and they don't have answers, only rehearsed lines delivered with trembling smiles, because the truth has teeth and it's biting through their carefully constructed narrative. There are whispers now, not about you, but about them. The same whispers that used to pierce your heart now wrap around their reputation like vines, soft at first, but tightening. The truth doesn't need a spotlight. It waits, it accumulates, and then it stands in the middle of the stage without ever raising its voice. You didn't need to expose them. They exposed themselves with every repetition of the same mistake, with every person who sees through the performance, with every echo of your absence ringing louder than their presence. Now they sit in rooms that feel colder, speak to people who don't truly listen, cling to lives that feel hollow, in the places where you used to bring depth. And though they would never say your name out loud, they feel you, in the silence after the laughter, in the way the mirror no longer flatters, in the strange ache that follows every easy victory. Because truth is patient, and it always arrives, just after the applause dies. You didn't win by fighting, you won by surviving, by letting time be your witness, by letting silence become your sword. They tried to erase you, and ended up drawing their own reflection. And now, they're learning the hardest lesson of all. The mask doesn't fall off all at once. It crumbles, bit by bit, in the places that matter most. When the crowd has gone home, when the lights are out, and all that's left is the truth. Regret isn't loud. It doesn't shout in the streets or collapse in public. It lives in whispers, in rooms no one else can hear. It arrives after the party, when the lights are off and the phone doesn't ring. It sits beside them in the dark. They remember how you stayed soft, even when you were breaking, how you gave and gave until giving meant self-extinction, and they let it happen. Worse, they watched and called your burning drama. But now they can't burn you from their thoughts, because you never screamed, you never begged, you just disappeared. And that silence is louder than any goodbye. They sit beside people who don't know your story, but you still appear, in how they flinch when someone says your favorite phrase, in how they freeze when a scent, a song, a sentence brings you rushing back like thunder beneath glass. They remember things they pretend not to. The way you looked when you forgave them for the 5th time. The way your voice cracked when you still chose love over pride. The way you held the pain like it was your job to carry what they couldn't face. And now they carry what you left behind. Not objects, but weight, regret, echo. It's not revenge. It's memory. And memory is merciless when it's mixed with guilt. You're not their wound. You're the scar they try to ignore, but always itch when the air gets cold. And they wonder, what if they stayed? What if they answered differently? What if they hadn't called you crazy, broken, too much? What if they realized you were never too much? They were simply too empty to hold it. That what if is a knife they sleep beside now, every night. And you don't need to speak, because your absence has a voice, and it whispers, I was the one, and you knew it. but you let me rot for your comfort. Let them ache. Let the candle flicker. Let them try to blow it out and fail. Because you were never a phase. You were never a lesson. You were the turning point they'll never recover from. And that's the weight they carry now. You didn't beg. You didn't chase. You didn't craft a final message to make them understand. You just left. And in that silence, they finally heard everything. Because absence has a sound, a frequency, a vibration that only echoes in the hollow spaces people pretend aren't empty. You didn't shout. You didn't set fire to their name. You didn't scream to be seen. You simply vanished, like air leaving a room. And that's when it hit them. The storm they thought they were escaping was actually the shelter. The chaos they blamed you for was the only proof they were still alive. Now they sit in stillness, in rooms that feel colder, beds that feel wider, laughter that dies quicker. They thought your presence was pressure. Now they know it was protection. You didn't fight for closure. You became it, not through revenge, but through absence. Because nothing haunts like the peace that follows a real one's departure. Not peace for them, but for you. Your absence became their most loyal ghost. It visits when they laugh too loud, lurks in conversations where your name is forbidden, watches from the corners of their mind every time they wonder if they made the right decision, and feel that deep, sinking answer settle into their chest. You left no damage, only the proof of what they'll never find again. And that realization, it comes slowly, painfully, like light creeping into a room they tried to keep dark. Because the world didn't collapse when you left. Theirs did. They just didn't notice at first. Too busy replacing your presence with distractions, with noise, with people who don't know where the switches are. Now they stumble through conversations that feel scripted, touch skin that doesn't remember them, laugh in photos that look good but feel dead. Because you were real, and real doesn't echo. It leaves silence, a silence that lingers, that sharpens, that grows teeth in the quiet moments. You didn't slam the door. You didn't look back. You just stopped showing up. And in doing so, you became louder than you ever were while screaming. They don't talk about you, but you're in every story they hesitate to tell. In every "I'm fine" that doesn't quite land. In every new connection that collapses under the weight of comparison. You are the measurement now, the mark they can't erase. And that's the thing about ghosts. They don't need a body to haunt. Your silence became their mirror, and what they see terrifies them. Let them sit in it. Let them feel the weight of what they made you carry. You didn't leave to prove a point. You left because staying meant betrayal of yourself. And now they finally understand the price of what they lost. Not through punishment, but through presence denied. The one they mistook for ordinary was the one they now dream of. When dreams start to feel like regrets, let them ache. Let them wonder. Let them rot. In the silence you left behind, you didn't rise in fire. You didn't explode. You didn't make a scene or demand applause. You rose in frost, slow, silent, unbothered. Because this time, it wasn't about them. It wasn't about proving, performing, or being witnessed. It was about remembering who you were, before the world taught you to apologize for your strength, before they made you believe your depth was a burden, before they twisted your kindness into currency they could spend and discard. You rose because silence became a cathedral, a place where you rebuilt, not with noise, but with precision. No announcements. No banners. Just quiet decisions in locked rooms where your soul came back to you, piece by piece. This wasn't a comeback. It was a return to your original self, before the bending, before the breaking, before the softness was weaponized against you. They don't see it, not yet, because there's nothing to see. The glow doesn't come from spotlight. It comes from sovereignty, from detachment, from moving in a way that no longer needs explanation. You no longer bleed for closure. You no longer offer your name like it's a question. You no longer show your wounds like proof of how much you cared. Now, you carry them in silence, and silence has become your throne. You stopped chasing, not because you gave up, but because you woke up. They called you crazy because you felt too deeply. But now they'll call you distant because you feel with precision. You give nothing away for free. No access, no explanation, no entrance into the temple you've become. They can't reach you now, not because you're hiding, but because you're healed. And healing built walls made of reflection. If they try to come close again, they'll only meet themselves. There's no revenge here, only evolution. You no longer need to be right. You need to be real. You no longer need their apology. You've become your own justice. This is the rise they didn't anticipate. Not loud, not public, but permanent. The kind of rise that doesn't need to be shared. Because real power doesn't broadcast. It simply exists, and it shifts the room without ever speaking. They broke the version of you they thought was the only one. What they didn't know was that your truest form hadn't even arrived yet. This is that form, and it doesn't care who's watching. They search for you now, in whispers, in eyes that almost look like yours, in voices that nearly hit the same note, but almost isn't you. Close doesn't echo, and replicas don't resurrect what's already been buried. They thought what you gave was common. That depth like yours came packaged in anyone who smiled enough, agreed enough, played it safe enough. But now they know diamonds don't come in pairs. And you? You were carved under pressure. They'll never survive. They'll taste every version of you. The soft voice, the sharp wit, the unwavering loyalty. But it will never be real again. Because the original is gone, and there is no reprint. You were the only edition ever printed. They'll touch fragments, but they won't hold you. They'll kiss echoes, but never hear your voice in the quiet. They'll love ghosts, but your spirit, it doesn't haunt, it reigns. They burned the bridge thinking it was made of straw. They didn't know it was sacred. That your presence wasn't a placeholder, but a singularity, a moment the universe won't bother recreating. Now they scroll through strangers, hoping one might crack the code of what made you unforgettable. But algorithms don't find soul, and compatibility isn't the same as connection. They'll find new hands, but those hands won't hold the storm like yours did. They'll hear new laughs, but none will carry the thunder that shook their silence the way yours used to. You were art. They treated you like wallpaper. Now they hang mirrors and can't understand why they only see themselves and not the masterpiece they once had. Because you gave them something they didn't have the language for, something that couldn't be explained, only felt. Only remembered, only missed when it's too late. They'll say they've moved on. Of course they will. They'll post proof, curated happiness, staged peace. But the heart doesn't lie, and every quiet moment between their noise will whisper the same cruel truth. They had the rarest thing, and they let it slip through their hands, because it didn't come with a warning label. They'll tell the story in reverse, make themselves the victim, blame timing, blame misalignment, blame anything but themselves. But late at night, when their smile collapses under the weight of memory, they'll see it clearly. You were it, not because you were perfect, but because you were real. Now you walk in silence, and that silence is colder than your presence ever was. Because now they know you're unreachable, not out of pride, but because your value is no longer negotiable. You were not a lesson. You were a loss, a holy one. And holy things, once desecrated, don't return. Let them search. Let them ache. Let them compare every flame to the wildfire they once called too much. Because you weren't too much. You were everything, and they simply weren't enough to hold it. They thought they buried you, laughed as the dirt fell, clapped as the silence settled, believed they'd ended something. But you weren't soil, you were seed. And now, your roots have grown beneath everything they tried to build without you. Thick, silent, unforgiving. They wear smiles now, but those smiles stretch thin over skeletons, bones of every decision that cracked under the weight of your absence. They hold hands with replacements, but those hands are colder than yours ever were. They pretend, because pretending is all they have left. You, on the other hand, don't pretend anymore. You don't explain your silence. Don't decorate your scars. Don't negotiate your worth. You wear your pain like armor now, and every scar has been polished into a blade. You didn't heal into softness. You healed into sovereignty, and they dissolved into the dust of their own ego. Every time they smile in public, there's a grimace hiding just beneath, because grief has a strange way of dressing itself in nostalgia and regret. Regret doesn't age. It stays young. It stays hungry. They drink from cups you once filled, hoping for the same flavor, but everything tastes empty now, because what you poured was soul, and the world doesn't sell soul. You became the silence that surrounds their laughter, the flicker in their eye when someone asks, "Do you ever miss them?" They won't answer. They'll look down, smile, lie, but their eyes will scream, because justice didn't arrive with noise. It arrived with absence, with elegance, with evolution. You became what they feared, untouchable, not because you were cruel, but because you were kind, and they treated kindness like it was disposable. Now, the wind speaks your name in places you've never returned to. Now, your energy lingers in rooms you no longer occupy. You haunt them, not like a ghost, but like gravity, undeniable, everywhere, and pulling. They told themselves a story where you were the fool, the fragile, the fallback. But now, even that story feels hollow, because you didn't break. You bloomed, and your roots now strangle the ruins they sleep in. They walked over you, not knowing you were earth. They spoke over you, not knowing you were storm. They played with your silence, not knowing it was the sound of something sacred waking. This is not revenge. This is reclamation. This is nature correcting the lie. This is balance dressed in black. This is poetic justice. Because while they performed happiness for strangers, you became peace in solitude. While they sought attention, you became legacy. They can post smiles. You cast shadows. And shadows, unlike smiles, don't lie. Let them smile. Let them dance in the shallow end of attention, while you stand, still and sovereign, in the silence they once feared. Let them pretend they're whole. Let them rewrite the past with trembling hands, scrubbing their guilt with louder laughter. Let them twist your story into a version they can live with, because the truth has teeth and they can no longer bear the bite. You don't chase. You don't correct. You don't appear in their storm because you became the weather. You've become the presence that enters the room before your name is even said. And when your name does arrive, it doesn't shout. It drips like perfume on old wounds, like smoke through cracked windows, like truth in a mouth full of lies. They flinch, they pause, they smile through it, but inside